Before the world associated Venezuela with collapse, shortages, or mass migration, it was once seen as a nation of promise. Few countries entered the second half of the 20th century with as much optimism as Venezuela. Beneath its soil flowed vast reserves of oil, and with them came money, influence, and international prestige. The country projected stability, prosperity, and modernity in a region often marked by political instability. Yet history rarely collapses overnight. Long before visible decline, there are silent fractures, ignored warnings, and decisions whose consequences remain hidden for decades. By the mid-20th century, Venezuela had become one of the world's most important oil producers. Petroleum exports reshaped the national economy at extraordinary speed. Government revenues expanded rapidly, infrastructure projects multiplied, and ambitious urban development transformed daily life. Caracas emerged as a symbol of modern Latin America, defined by highways, concrete towers, and access to imported goods. For many citizens, this era represented opportunity and progress. For foreign observers, Venezuela appeared to have escaped the chronic instability faced by much of the region. However, this prosperity carried a hidden cost. Oil came to dominate the economy almost entirely, while agriculture weakened and domestic industry stagnated. Economic diversification was repeatedly postponed, replaced by dependence on petroleum income. Over time, this imbalance shaped not only markets, but political behavior itself. Oil wealth reduced pressure for accountability, allowing inefficiencies and corruption to persist. As long as revenue flowed, the system appeared stable. But stability built on a single resource is inherently fragile. Politically, Venezuela followed a path distinct from many neighboring countries. After the fall of dictator Marcos Pérez Jiménez in 1958, civilian leaders sought to prevent future authoritarian rule. The Punto Fijo Pact established a democratic framework based on power sharing between major political parties. Elections were regular, institutions functioned, and military coups were avoided. For decades, Venezuela stood as a democratic exception in Latin America. Yet over time, political competition narrowed, and power circulated among the same elites. While democracy endured in form, it weakened in substance. Ordinary citizens felt increasingly disconnected from decision-making, and political participation declined. The state continued to expand, fueled by oil income, but long-term planning suffered. When global oil prices fluctuated in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the vulnerabilities of this model became impossible to ignore. What followed would expose the limits of prosperity built without resilience and set the stage for a national reckoning. While democracy endured in form, it weakened in substance. Ordinary citizens felt increasingly disconnected from decision-making, and political participation declined. The state continued to expand, fueled by oil income, but long-term planning suffered. When global oil prices fluctuated in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the vulnerabilities of this model became impossible to ignore. What followed would expose the limits of prosperity built without resilience and set the stage for a national reckoning. As oil prices declined, Venezuela entered a period of growing economic strain. Inflation increased, foreign debt expanded, and purchasing power eroded. For the first time in decades, many Venezuelans experienced a decline in living standards. The promise of continuous progress no longer felt guaranteed. Public confidence in political leadership weakened, and dissatisfaction spread quietly across social classes. Government responses focused on short-term stabilization rather than structural reform. Subsidies and public spending continued, even as fiscal pressure mounted. Corruption scandals became more frequent, reinforcing perceptions of elite mismanagement. Institutions remained intact on paper, but trust once lost proved difficult to restore. The distance between citizens and the political system widened with each passing year. The breaking point arrived in 1989. Facing severe economic pressure, the government announced austerity measures, including reductions in subsidies and increases in fuel prices. Transportation costs rose sharply, basic goods became more expensive, and daily life grew harder for millions. Protests erupted in Caracas and quickly spread nationwide. What began as demonstrations escalated into widespread unrest. The event would become known as the Caracazo. Looting, clashes, and chaos filled the streets as state authority faltered. In response, the government deployed military forces to restore order. Hundreds of civilians were killed, and the true number remains uncertain. For many Venezuelans, this moment shattered any remaining faith in the political system. The image of a democratic state protecting its citizens collapsed, replaced by fear, anger, and disillusionment. The Caracazo marked a psychological rupture. The social contract that had sustained decades of stability was broken. Venezuela could no longer return to political normality as it once knew it. The crisis revealed that the nation's problems were not temporary setbacks, but structural failures long ignored. And from the ruins of that realization, a new political era was already beginning to take shape. In the years following the Caracazo, Venezuela entered a period of deep uncertainty. Economic instability persisted, corruption scandals multiplied, and political institutions struggled to recover legitimacy. Public frustration extended beyond civilian life and into the armed forces. The sense that the system no longer represented the people became widespread. Failed military uprisings in the early 1990s signaled that dissatisfaction had reached critical levels. Though unsuccessful, these attempts revealed how deeply confidence in civilian leadership had eroded. Venezuela remained rich in natural resources, yet poor in cohesion, trust, and institutional credibility. The foundations of the political order were no longer secure. By the end of the decade, the national mood had fundamentally changed. Venezuelans were no longer asking how to reform the system, but whether it deserved to survive at all. Years of inequality, exclusion, and unfulfilled promises had created fertile ground for radical alternatives. The collapse that would follow was not caused by a single leader or ideology, but by decades of accumulated imbalance. This was the Venezuela that existed before Hugo Chávez assumed power. A country already weakened, already fractured, already searching for a new direction. The story of what came next would redefine Venezuela's place in history. But that is a story still unfolding, written not only by leaders, but by the consequences of choices made long before them.